Chapter 14. The World Discovers Wimbe. Despite the incident with the famine, my popularity as an inventor led to other opportunities. That same year, one of the teachers at Wimbe Primary asked if I'd be interested in starting a science club for the students. He was impressed by my windmill and wanted one on campus. "The students look up to you," he said. "Your skills in science will really challenge their brains." "Sure," I said, "I'll do it." The windmill I created for the school was small, much like my first radio experiment. For the blades, I used a metal maize pail, and the generator was a radio motor. I attached it to a blue gum pole and ran the wires into my old Panasonic two-battery radio. I did this during recess one morning when all the kids were playing soccer. When I connected the wires and the music blasted through the schoolyard, a small riot erupted from all the excitement. The windmill not only allowed students to listen to music and news, but they could also charge their parents' mobile phones. Each Monday, I explained to them the basics of science and gave some popular examples of simple innovation, like how ink was first made by using charcoal. I also demonstrated the cup and string experiment featured in my books to help explain how telephone works. I walked them through the steps of how I'd built everything using everyday materials. "So many things around you are reusable," I told them. "Where others see garbage, I see opportunity." I hoped I was inspiring them in some way, because if I could teach my neighbors how to build windmills, I thought, what else could we build together? "In science, we invent and create," I continued. "We make new things that can benefit our situation. If we can all invent something to make our lives better, we can change Malawi." I found out that some of the students had been so inspired by the windmill, they'd gone home and made toy versions of themselves. I imagined what it would be like if all those pinwheels were real. What if every home and shop in Wimbe had machines on the rooftops to catch the wind? At night, the entire valley would sparkle like clear sky full of stars. Bringing electricity to my people no longer seemed like a madman's dream. In early November 2006, some officials from the Malawi teacher training activity were inspecting the library at Wimbe Primary when they noticed my windmill in the schoolyard. They asked Miss Sikolo, who'd built it, if she could give them my name. One of them telephoned his boss, Dr. Hartford Machazme, and described what he'd seen. A few days later, Dr. Machazme drove 5 hours to Wimbe. He was even more amazed once he saw the larger windmill at my house, and he asked my father if he could speak with the boy who'd built it. "He's here," my father said, and called me from my room. Dr. Machizme was an older man with gray hair and kind, patient eyes, but when he spoke, his command of language was large and powerful. I'd never heard anyone speak such good Chihuahua, and when he spoke English, it was simply eloquent. He asked me about the windmill and how it came about. "Tell me everything," he said. I told the stories I'd done 100 times before, then took him through the house, demonstrating how my switches and the circuit breaker worked. He listened carefully, nodding his head, and asked specific questions. "These are very tiny bulbs. Why aren't you using big ones?" "I can use big ones," I said, "but the big lights require more voltage. The dynamo is only so strong." "How far did you go with your education?" "Just the first year in secondary school." "Then how did you know about this stuff about voltage and power?" "I've been borrowing books from your library." "Who teaches you this stuff? Who helps you?" "No one," I said. "I've been reading and doing it alone." Dr. Machizme then went to see my parents. "You have lights in your house because of your son," he said. "What do you think of this?" "We thought he was mad," my mother said. Dr. Machizme laughed and shook his head. "I want to tell you something," he said. "You may not realize, but your son has done something an amazing thing, and this is only the beginning. You're going to see a lot more people coming here to see William Kamkwamba. I have a feeling the boy will go far. I want you to be ready." The visit left me a little confused and very excited. No one had ever asked me such questions before, and no one had taken that kind of interest. That afternoon, Dr. Machizme returned to his office in Zamba and told his colleagues what he'd seen. "This is fantastic," they said. "The whole world needs to know about this boy." "I agree," said Dr. Machizme, "and I have just the idea." The next week, Dr. Machizme returned to my house with a journalist from Radio 1. It was the famous Everson Masaya, whose voice I'd heard for years. He'd come to my house to interview me. "What do you call this thing?" he asked. "I'm calling it electric wind." "But how does it work?" "The blades spin and generate power from a dynamo. And in the future, what do you want to do with this?" "I want to reach every village in Malawi so people can have lights and water." While we waited for the Radio 1 interview to air, Dr. Machizme came with even more reporters. These men represented all the great media organizations in Malawi. Muthizwu and Zodiac radio channels, the Daily Times, the Nation, and Malawi News. They poured out of the car with their cameras and tape recorders and flocked around the windmill. For 2 hours, they moved through the house, elbowing and shoving one another to get the best pictures of my switches and battery system. You had your time, now it's my turn. Move aside, my paper is bigger. Soon our yard was filled with crowds from the trading center who'd come to gawk at the famous journalists. Look, it's Noel Mukumbi from Zodiac, they yelled. Finally, we see his face. What a handsome man. He's interviewing William. One of the reporters even climbed my tower and studied the blades and chain system, taking pictures the whole time. Machisme, this chap is genius, he shouted. Yes, he answered, and this is the problem with our system. We're losing talent like this all the time as a result of poverty, and when we do send them back to school, it's not a good education. I'm bringing you here because I want the world to see what this boy has done, and I want them to help. Like me, Dr. Machisme's father had been a poor farmer who'd struggled to feed and clothe his family, but he knew the value of education. At one point, when Dr. Machisme was young, he had volunteered to drop out of school and work so that his brothers could go instead. His father refused, saying, "Of all my kids will stay in school, I'll do what it takes." It took nearly 10 years for Dr. Machisme to complete his secondary education. He later earned degrees from universities in Malawi, America, Britain, and South Africa. Before working for the MTTA, he'd written many Malawian textbooks, including my own Standard 8 English reader. The day after the journalists came to visit, the interview finally aired on Radio 1. I was behind the house chatting with my aunt when my mother shouted, "William, quick, it's coming on!" My family gathered around the radio and I heard the announcer say, "A boy in Wimbe, near Kasungu, has made electric wind." When my voice came through the speakers, my sisters began to cheer. If the radio show weren't enough good fortune, the story in the Daily Times was published the following week with a big headline that said, "School dropout with a streak of genius." The story had a photo of me pretending to connect the wires to the battery in my room, still unable to wipe the smile from my face. That afternoon, I took the paper to the trading center to show everyone what the madman had done. "We also heard you on the radio," they said. "We're so impressed at how well you spoke." In a way, it took having these reporters come to my house to make our town finally accept my windmill. After the media coverage, the number of visitors to my house increased tenfold. Shortly after, I started some much-needed improvements to the windmill. I realized the big mango tree behind the latrine was blocking my strongest wind and I needed to go higher. My father, with the Daily Times story under his arm, was able to convince the manager of the tobacco estate to give me several giant poles, which I used to build a tower that was 36 feet high. Once I moved it away from the mango tree, the speed of my blades doubled, and so did the voltage. The day after the Daily Times article ran, a Malawian in Lilongwe named Soyapi Mumba brought the articles to his office. Soyapi worked as a software engineer and a coder at Baobab Health Partnership, an American charity organization that was working to computerize Malawi's healthcare system. One of Soyapi's colleagues, a tall American named Mike McKay, liked the article about my windmill so much that he wrote about me on his blog, Hacktivate. The blog entry caught the attention of Emeka Okafor, a famous Nigerian author and blogger who is also the program director of something called the TED Global Conference. Well, Emeka wanted me to apply to be an official fellow at this conference, and for 3 weeks tried very hard to find me. After harassing the reporters at the paper every day, he finally tracked down Dr. Machisme. In mid-December 2006, Dr. Machisme came to my home with the application and paperwork for TED. We sat down under the mango tree and he helped me answer a list of questions, plus write a small essay about my life. When he left, I still had no idea what TED was, though I do now. It means Technology, Entertainment, and Design, and it's an annual meeting where scientists and innovators get together and share their big ideas. I wasn't entirely sure what a conference was or what people did at such things. The application didn't even say where it was held. I suspected Lilongwe, the capital, but didn't know. I imagined myself walking those busy streets and seeing all sorts of new people. I wondered what clothes I would need to wear, since everything I owned hung from a rope in my bedroom and was covered in red roof dust. Even still, it gave me something to dream about. The following week, Dr. Machisme called to say that TED had chosen me. The conference would be held in Arusha, Tanzania, an entirely different country. "You'll be honored with other scientists and inventors," he said. "People from all over the world will be there. Perhaps something good can come from it." Wow, Arusha, how long will it take? How long would that bus ride take? And what if I got hungry? Well, I'd had to bring plenty of food, perhaps cakes and roasted maize. After all, I had no money. "One important thing," he said. "We should book your flight before it fills up." "I'm traveling by plane?" God. Yes, and they wish to know if you want a smoking or non-smoking room in the hotel. I'm staying at a hotel? He said. Or I'm sorry. I thought for sure I'd been sleeping in one of those guest houses near the boozing dens where poor people stay. Of course you're staying in a hotel, he said, and I have other good news, William. You're going back to school. After visiting my house with the reporters, Dr. Machisme approached the government about accepting me into a school. He'd even take a collection among his colleagues to help pay for my first semester. The entire process had taken months. Finally, the Minister of Education had granted me permission to attend Medici Secondary, a public boarding school, an hour from my home. It wasn't one of the science-based schools I'd longed to attend. The headmasters at those places weren't willing to accept me on account of my old age and number of years I'd been a dropout. However, the headmaster of Medici, Mr. Ronex Banda, was so moved by my story that he offered to spend the extra time with me, helping me catch up. I was terribly behind. While Dr. Machisme planned my trip to Arusha, I packed my things and went to school. This was the first time I'd ever lived away from home. In my suitcase, I packed a toothbrush and toothpaste, flip-flops, a blanket, and all my dirt-streaked clothes. I carried it out to the courtyard and stopped under the mango tree where Jeffrey and my parents were waiting. I guess I'll see you soon, I told them. Work hard, my father said. I want you to know we're very proud. Jeffrey strapped my suitcase to his bicycle and we rolled it towards the truck stop. Along the way, I said goodbye to Gilbert. We don't have phones, so how will we talk, he asked. It will be difficult, I said. Maybe I can come visit you there. Oh, Gilbert, that would be great. Please do. I'll miss you, friend. For sure. A pickup soon appeared in a cloud of dust. Jeffrey waved his hand and flagged down the driver. I'll see you when school ends, he said. When you arrive, find someone with a phone and send me their number. We'll talk this way, and I'll make sure Gilbert is there. That would be good, I said. Take care of my windmill, will you? Let me know everything that happens. Sure. Don't worry. I climbed aboard with the other passengers, found a sack of charcoal for a seat, and we rolled towards Kasungu. Once there, I caught a minibus down the M1 highway to the small town of Medici. The minibus dropped me at a junction on the outskirts of town where a long road led to the school. I walked a kilometer with my suitcase bouncing behind on the gravel road until I stood outside the gates. In a matter of minutes, I had a dorm room, dorm mates, meal times, and a rigorous schedule of classes. Everything was new and foreign and a little overwhelming, but my God, what a pleasure it was to be learning in a real school. The classrooms in Medici had solid roofs that didn't leak, smooth, unblemished concrete floors, large windows set in the sunshine but kept out the cold. I had an actual desk of my own, complete with a pencil holder. During study sessions at night, real fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, or at least they did when there wasn't a blackout. Science class was held in an actual chemistry lab where the shelves were lined with microscopes, giant coils of high-resistance wires, glass beakers, and old jars of boric acid. If you can believe it, one of the first lessons in science was how current passes through an electric bell. I'd already applied this concept with my windmill and circuit breaker, and having it explained in scientific terms in English was like hearing it for the first time. But like every other school in Malawi, Medici relied on the government to survive. Unlike some of the more prestigious boarding schools, it had been forgotten. Most of the equipment in the science lab was old and no longer worked. The chemicals had expired and were dangerous. The microscopes were rusted and scratched. For the electric bell lecture, we had no batteries to supply the power. If anyone has an extra one in their rooms, I'd be happy to demonstrate, the teacher said. No one did, so we used our imaginations. Our dorm rooms were all so dirty and the walls were covered with graffiti. The urinals in the bathroom didn't work, so the new students, namely me, had to clean them every day to keep down the smell. The rooms themselves were so cramped that we each had to share our bed with another boy. My bedmate was a guy named Kennedy, who'd never cleaned his socks. Hey, man, you need to wash your feet before you come to bed with me, I told him. Sorry, I can never tell, he said. I'll wash tomorrow, promise. But he never did. Often I'd wake up with his feet touching my mouth. And because I was years older than everyone else, some of the students teased me. They shouted, How many kids you leave behind at the farm, old man? 2 boys, I said, and 1 more on the way, perhaps next month. He thinks he's funny, they said. He's spending too much time with his cows. One day I decided to end the teasing once and for all. I pulled the newspaper article about my windmill and slapped it down on the table. Here, I said, this is what I was doing. My dorm mates were impressed. Good job, man, they said. No one teased me after that. Honestly, it really didn't bother me, because after 5 years of being a dropout, I was grateful to be in school. However, I did become homesick, and whenever that happened, I'd hide away in the school library where books filled rows and rows of shelves. I'd find a chair and study my lesson books in geography, social studies, biology, and math. I'd lose myself in American and African history and within the colorful maps of the world. No matter how foreign and lonely the world was outside, the books always reminded me of home, sitting under the mango tree. While I attended school at Medici, Dr. Machisme was busy making arrangements for Arusha. He helped me get a passport and even took a collection for a new white shirt and black trousers. They were the nicest clothes I had ever owned. He also gave me useful travel advice. For instance, on a plane, I'd be assigned a seat that was mine and only mine. There was no need to rush and use your elbows like people did on Malawian buses. Also, if the red light was on near the bathroom, that meant it was occupied because some passengers become nauseous on their first plane ride. Each seat came with a paper bag for vomit. Now, that was good information because I was certain I'd need it. In June, I left school and came home to pack. The next morning, a driver appeared to take me to the airport in Lilongwe. Our son is leaving us and traveling by airplane, my father told my mother, smiling. That's right, I said, flying like a bird in the sky. I'll be waving as I pass over. We'll be watching for you. You'll see us here. My father then tucked a bag of roasted peanuts in my pocket. They were still warm. That evening, I was so nervous I stayed awake in my hotel room watching soccer on Super Sport 3 until the sun came up and it was time to leave. On the plane, I couldn't believe it, but sitting next to me was none other than Soyapi Mumba, the software engineer from Lilongwe who'd first seen my article. Because he's a nice guy, he introduced himself, not knowing who I was. When I told him my name and where I was going, he replied, "Oh my God, William, the windmill guy?" He explained how excited he was to show the story to Mike McKay, who blogged about me on Hacktivate. Soyapi was the very reason anybody had ever heard about me, and now here he was sitting next to me on the plane. It also happened that Soyapi was a TED Fellow himself, being honored for his coding work with Baobab. I was so fortunate to find him. As the plane taxied toward the runway, I began to notice the others seated around me. They looked so well-dressed and confident, like they had important things to do, and their busy lives required them to travel in jets across the world. As the plane accelerated and lifted its nose in the air, I pressed my head back against the seat and laughed. I was now one of them, too. Hope you enjoyed the reading.